something shocking happened that mainstream media totally ignored. The BBC ignored it, CNN ignored it, of course, the New York Times ignored it, just about everyone did. Perhaps they didn't understand the gravity of the story. Perhaps they were too stupid. I'll show you what they missed in a moment. It was huge, and now it's actually getting worse. But first, there's some troubling news signs this morning that this war is spiraling out of control on two main fronts. The first front is the physical front. The second front is the economic front. But let's talk about the physical stuff first. You know, the tanks, the weapons, the casualties. This is the stuff that sells newspapers and that CNN loves. The media wants you to think that a few German tanks or a few U.S. Abrams tanks are going to do anything to turn the tide of this war. Because NATO is the most corrupt country in Europe. Yes, they are corrupt. Even Bill Gates yesterday stunningly came out and admitted how corrupt Ukraine is.
The Ukrainian government is one of the worst in the world. Corrupt, controlled by a few rich people. I mean, really unfortunate for the people in Ukraine.
Holy smokes, that's Bill Gates saying that. And you know what kind of an opinion we have of Bill Gates on this show. I bet Ukraine didn't like those comments. So meanwhile, this is what the mainstream media is talking about. Tanks, tanks, tanks.
All right, breaking news moments ago, a major development in the war in Ukraine after weeks of pressure from Western allies. Germany announcing this morning it will send those Leopard 2 tanks to the war zone.
Tanks, tanks. That's all they're talking about. The media loves tanks. But of course, these tanks will be blown up almost immediately. And everyone who's smart knows that. So these won't last long at all. The moment they arrive there, they will be turned into molten metal. But Zelensky just admitted what he really wants are F-16s. Yes, fighter jets. That's the next trick.
Дякую за це рішення. Дякую особисто пану президенту Байдену за готовність передати нам сучасні і дуже потрібні та важливо ми маємо розширювати і нашу співпрацю в артилерії. Ми маємо вийти на поставку літаків.
NATO will send fighter jets to a group of people who've never even played Microsoft's Flight Simulator on a Windows computer. All of this is a distraction, of course. The truth is, Ukraine has already lost this war. We knew this would happen from the moment this started. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin even admitted it through somewhat veiled words last week in Ramstein, Germany, when he said this.
So we have a window of opportunity here, between now and the spring whenever they commence their operation, their counteroffensive. And that's not a long time.
So let's parse that a moment. We have a window of opportunity here between now and the spring. That's not a long time, he admits. This window is narrowing. Staying on the physical stuff for a moment, the tanks, guns, etc., Colonel Douglas McGregor, friend of the show, astutely points out this morning in a new piece that he wrote, quote, Ukraine's material losses are severe. These include thousands of tanks and armored infantry fighting vehicles, artillery systems, air defense platforms, and weapons of all calibers. These totals include the equivalent of 7 years of Javelin missile production. In a setting where Russian artillery systems can fire nearly 60,000 rounds of all types, rockets, missiles, drones, hard-shell ammunition, in one day. Ukrainian forces are hard-pressed to answer these Russian salvos with 6,000 rounds per day. New platform and ammunition packages for Ukraine may enrich the Washington community, he writes, but they cannot change these conditions. Whoa. In other words, it's over. The greater problem is that Russia has now grown much stronger. Much, much stronger. And not just on the battlefield, not just the physical stuff. No, they are now much stronger economically. And this terrifies Washington. That's perhaps why Washington wants to begin the next stage of this war. A truly terrifying stage of this war, where members of the deep state, the permanent government, are calling for Ukraine to get nuclear weapons. Yes, it's true. As McGregor points out, warmongering stooge Michael Rubin, who is a former Bush administration official and an avid supporter of America's permanent wars, just published an article calling for America to provide nuclear weapons to Ukraine as a deterrence for the future. Rubin writes, quote, if the world allows Russia to remain a unitary state, and if it allows Putinism to survive Putin, then Ukraine should be allowed to maintain its own nuclear deterrence, whether it joins NATO or not. Huh. I wonder what Bill Gates thinks about this.
The Ukrainian government is one of the worst in the world.
The most corrupt country in Europe is going to get nuclear weapons? It might sound crazy, and it is, but it speaks to the awareness that the U.S. is in a rapid decline. You're watching the last gasps here. You know, America is at the top with its weapons and its war. That's how how it derives power. The threat of sanctions, of course, didn't work. So now let's threaten them with nuclear weapons. The second front is the economic front. Doesn't sell as many newspapers. It's not as sexy to talk about for CNN. But this is an even bigger story. Yes, CNN, it's even bigger than tanks.
This is huge news, right?
You're right, it is huge, Poppy Harlow. Now, everyone is focused on the tanks, but that's, of course, a huge distraction. That's cover for what's really happening here, which is an economic World War III, the likes of which we've never seen before. And I mean never, at this scale, with this much on the line. You see, back in March of 2022, the big news that the mainstream media ignored was that Putin made a major announcement in his country. He suddenly unleashed a plan that was in the works for more than 10 years. He told his people, his citizens, go out and buy gold and silver. Oh, and the government wants you to do this. Go out and buy precious metals. Oh, and they did. By the gallons. They snapped up record amounts. Putin unleashed an economic attack unlike we've ever seen before, and it was a sneak attack. It didn't happen on the battlefield. Instead, it happened at the banks. What Putin did is issue an announcement that Russia had changed the government laws, which now made it more attractive for the average Russian citizen to buy as much gold and as much silver as possible. The banks then had a run on precious metals. They ran out. There was a short...
Yeah, everyone's so full of shit. Alright, this is a video of clouds. Digital collection of electromagnetic nanocarbon from the cloud level from a few days ago. And I accuse you, anyone coming to these videos, if you can't see what it is I'm showing you, you're lying to yourself. I'm trying to be nice about it. You're lying to yourself. You can see it. You can go to this video yourself. Any of these videos for that matter. Take your camera phone out of your pocket and go start looking around. I mean, I can point them out as I used to do, but I don't even do that so much anymore because it's just fucking stupid, man. I mean, alright. So canine nose, right? You can see the teeth. It goes from human to canine, image within image within image, feline, canine, rodent, ape, human, and beast, all through here, every direction. It's all about the lights and shadows. You're seeing the true creator, the true creator's work. Distances, angles of perspective, all the shit I usually say. We can all see it.
Shortage in Russia, basically sold out of silver. The move by Russia was designed to reduce and ultimately eliminate dependence on the United States dollar as the reserve currency used in Russia. Instead, this moved the ruble towards commodities like gold and silver and solidified Russia's relationships with the BRICS nations, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. They could create their own reserve currency based on precious metals and commodities like oil, rather than a US dollar. This is why NATO is so desperate right now. It's not about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's about the money. It's about America's hegemony as the global financial leader. Russia told its citizens to buy gold and silver thanks to two huge changes in the tax code. The first, they got rid of the value-added tax, and then they changed the income tax, so when you would sell gold or silver in Russia, they wouldn't be penalized. So with that, the floodgates opened. And a new report out last week shows Russians bought a record amount of precious metals. More than 50 metric tons of physical gold was purchased by Russian citizens. And get this, 5 out of the 13 largest Russian banks sold 57 tons of physical bullion. That's right. All of this on top of the record amount of gold and silver that China already bought. So right now, there is currently a shortage of silver on the global markets thanks to the supply and demand. The globalists don't want you to own any of this. They want it all for themselves. The demand is off the charts, and what Putin just did was a crazy genius move because silver in particular is both a currency and an industrial metal, meaning it's used in every electronic device in your house right now, not to mention solar panels, which the demand for that is off the charts, and medical equipment. When I say big tycoons don't want you to own any of this, I really mean that. Famously, back in the 1970s, as inflation was skyrocketing in the United States, two guys by the name of the Hunt brothers carried out the famous silver squeeze that exposed the silver market. They were oil tycoons. They saw how important silver was. They bought 2/3, that's right, 2/3 of all the silver on Earth. It exposed how little silver there was in the world. Panic struck Wall Street in what was called the Silver Thursday. It was the greatest panic since 1929 and the Great Depression. Holy smokes, two brothers just cornered the silver market. That's all the silver we've got, and the United States dollar is losing massive value. Can you imagine that? It sent shockwaves through the markets. The price of silver then jumped from $6 an ounce to $50 an ounce. It got so bad that people were breaking into people's homes just to steal silver. Here's a Washington Post piece from the 1970s that catalogs the break-ins. The head of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission said at the time that the Hunt brothers tried to punch a hole in the financial fabric of the United States like nothing had in decades, he said. Sound familiar to what Putin is doing right now? Very similar. Eventually, the Fed stepped in, Congress held hearings, forced the Hunt brothers into bankruptcy. They had to sell their silver, but the same exposure is happening today. J.P. Morgan just did the same thing a few years ago. They tried to corner the silver market. They bought tons of silver, admitted to fraud, had to pay upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. An American bank just did this a few years ago. We didn't learn our lesson back in the 70s, but Congress isn't going to be able to hold Putin and Xi Jinping in front of congressional hearings for buying all of the silver. No, instead, they're sending NATO tanks and F-16s to attack Putin. And of course, we are actively moving weapons into Taiwan. Again, this isn't about Ukraine. NATO doesn't care at all about Ukraine. They care about the US dollar being destroyed. The price of silver is expected to rise even more as this economic war unfolds and the US dollar continues to collapse. So that's the news update portion of this video. Now I want to tell you about our sponsor for today's video, which is tied directly to this demand for silver right now. The company is called Dolly Varden Silver Company. Their stock ticker is DOLLF. Now pay attention because what I'm about to show you will blow your mind if you are an investor. And you'll quickly see why this company is my top silver pick for 2023. I'm going big into this one because right now the stock is trading at 68 cents a share.
Indian, maybe?
So far, in 1 year, this stock is up 20%. So right now, again, 68 cents today, it's already up 20% this year. But here's the amazing part. Analysts have a price target for this stock to hit $1.60. That's a massive increase. And here's why. So pay attention to this. Dolly Varden is a one-of-a-kind silver mining company. They are literally the best. This is a crown jewel of a silver company. So first, just so you understand who's already investing in this company, 10% of the company is owned by the largest and best silver miner in the world right now. That's right, 10% of the company is owned by Eric Sprott, the self-made billionaire investor. He is, of course, the Michael Jordan of silver. He's the best ever investor in the silver sector. The next 7.5% of this company is owned by Wall Street giant Fidelity. That's right. This is insane for one big reason. Dolly Varden is in pre-production right now on perhaps the best silver vein in the world. To our knowledge, Fidelity has never ever invested in a pre-production silver company. What Fidelity does is they wait and then invest after the company pulls the silver out of the ground. Of course, then the huge explosion in stock price is already missed by them. But anyway, that's what Fidelity usually does. So they have immense faith, for some reason, that Dolly Varden is about to hit the mother lode of silver. So they invested before production started. They own 7.5% of the shares. So just to reiterate, we have Eric Sprott with 10% of the company, Fidelity with 7.5% of the shares. Next, Dolly Varden is drilling right now in an area known as the Golden Triangle. Now, if you're a silver investor, you know that this is the richest mineral region on Earth, the best. The jurisdiction is literally called the Golden Triangle. It is the richest mineral region on the planet. It started with the original gold rush 100 years ago. Now remember, if you're a silver investor, you already know this, you're already read up on this, but if you're not, if you're new to this, I want to help you understand. We hit peak silver supply about 5 or 6 years ago. So we hit peak silver about 5 or 6 years ago. Silver production on a worldwide basis has actually been dropping as Russia and China have been buying it up. And now we're not seeing as much silver produced from these mines. Dolly Varden has more than tripled its silver resource with acquisitions and discoveries, and now comes with a new set of drilling results, which we could see any day now. So again, here is the stock ticker for Dolly Varden on your screen. It's DOLLF. Right now, today, Sunday, the stock is trading at 68 cents a share. That's up 20% over the last year already. And analysts have a price target of $1.60 a share. That is a massive increase. They could announce drilling results any day now. So I want you to do your own due diligence on this company. Again, This is one of my top silver picks of 2023. I'm going to have links to their website in the description below. Look, I think their drilling results could make them a fantastic buyout target. I'm not saying they are being bought out. I'm just saying when they hit a mother lode like they could, this could make them a big target for another company to swoop in and acquire them,
That's awesome.
which of course is huge profits for any stockholder. So I'm saying just keep your eye on what their drilling results could be in the next few days. I'll have links to their website in the description below. You can check out their latest silver production projects on their website. Keep an eye on their drilling results, which again could come any day now. So we'll see you next time, everyone.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called Yo One Wellness Center. The Yo One
Oops.
And tanks to Ukraine, the United States with Abrams tanks, Germany with Leopard 2 tanks, Poland also announcing it's sending Leopard tanks to Ukraine yesterday. And this morning, we learned that Portugal announced it's sending tanks to Ukraine, a country that I didn't even know had any tanks. Russia says that Europe is now expanding the target for this war, and Russia will see these as potential targets going forward. Have we just escalated things beyond where they were before? Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector. He knows a thing or two about weapons and their implications, and he joins us on the show. Scott, great to have you back.
Thanks for having me.
So last week on the show, you said something that I thought was incredibly important, and I've been thinking about it all week, which is the more weapons we send to Ukraine, the more weapons NATO sends to Ukraine, the weaker it makes Ukraine, both in terms of manpower and, of course, opening it up for further attack. You see this amplification, these additional tanks that are being sent as vindication of your message, or is now Ukraine suddenly going to win this war?
Well, Ukraine's not going to win this war. They're definitely not going to win it with 14 Leopard 2 tanks, A6 variants that Germany claims it's going to provide by the end of March, early April. 14 more Leopard A2 tanks that Poland's going to provide. Between 30 and 50 Abrams tanks, which aren't going to show up on the battlefield till the end of this year or early next year, or any other tanks that are going to be provided. The fact of the matter is, these tanks aren't game changers. The Ukrainians have been trained to fight in Soviet-era tanks, T-72s, and their own T-64 updates, three-person crews. They're inheriting tanks right now. They're going to receive tanks that have four-person crews. Why? Because you have to manually load these tanks. So automatically, the whole concept of putting a crew in a tank and employing the tank is fundamentally changed. And if you haven't trained on this, if you haven't practiced on it, you're just getting into a system. It's like, if I brought you a Formula One car and you've never trained on high-speed driving, and I said, Clayton, take her for a spin.
Right.
You would be like a little old grandma. And you have no clue what you're doing. You don't know how to handle this piece of machinery. That's going to be the Ukrainians with this equipment. It takes 22 weeks to train an M1 Abrams crew member. I would imagine that the Leopard 2 tank is equally as complex a piece of equipment. And so Germany is going to provide 14 of these tanks in, 10 weeks' time? So even if the Ukrainians were getting training right now, when they receive the tanks, they're not going to be trained on it, let alone know what to do with 14 tanks. If anybody thinks 14 tanks is a game changer, you have no clue what modern war is. These 14 tanks will be chewed up if they ever arrive on the battlefield. But the likelihood of all 14 arriving is slim to none because of the maintenance problem of these tanks. This is one of the things we talked about previously about the different infantry fighting vehicles that were being provided and the maintenance nightmare they presented. For the M1 Abrams tank, under ideal circumstances, for every hour of operation, you need 3 hours of maintenance. And that's with American crews that are actually trained, dedicated military occupation specialties of guys who go through the schools. They know how to do this, and they have the entire system backing them up. So you know in the United States system, we'll have the tank company up front, and behind it is this huge system ready to back it up. With the Ukrainians, we're going to put an M1 Abrams tank company out front, and then there's going to be this thin little umbilical cord that goes back because there will be no direct support. If the tank breaks, it has to be removed from the battlefield, taken back to a place where it can be repaired. You know, it's going to be very difficult for this tank to appear on the battlefield because the Russians right now are a little irritated, and they're going to put everything they have into interdicting these weapons before they get to the battlefield. So let's say they get to the battlefield and they break. That just means they have to run the gauntlet one more time to get fixed, and then run the gauntlet again to come back. Every time you do that, you're setting up Ukrainians to die. And this is all that's going to happen. These weapons will have no meaningful impact. Just a news flash for NATO and all the NAFO fellas out there that are sort of cheerleading right now that this is a great thing. For the last 20 years, NATO and the United States have been focused singularly on Afghanistan and the Middle East. The last thing they've been doing is preparing for large-scale ground combat in Europe. The Russians have been preparing for large-scale ground combat in Europe since 2008. In 2016, they fundamentally reworked their organizational structures, and they're continuing to update them today for the sole purpose of closing with and destroying a NATO-style army. That doesn't just mean how NATO fights doctrinally, but the equipment. Every piece of Russian equipment that's in the Russian inventory today has been designed and is intended to kill NATO tanks. So if people think that the Leopard 2 showing up on the battlefield is suddenly going to scare the Russians, you're wrong. They're ready for it, they've trained for it, and they have the equipment to deal death and destruction. And for the Germans, I just don't know what's going through their brains.
Yeah.
The idea of putting German tanks on Ukrainian soil for the purpose of killing Russians. Man, that didn't work out too good the last time they did it, and it's not going to work out too good this time.
Yeah, it seems like instead of going the opposite direction and moving towards peace, we're doubling down on this. Now, Russia, of course, amplifying its rhetoric over the past 24 hours and saying, this is an extension now of the targets, right? You're now opening up the targets. This isn't just the Ukrainian battlefield now. This gives, I mean, you can speak to that a little bit, what you're hearing from Russia now, that you're sort of expanding the battlefield beyond just Ukraine. We're now actively looking at, you have Portugal announcing these tanks are going to be delivered through Spain. They're actively telling us how on rail lines they're going to be delivering these tanks through Spain. So they're going to be coming from Poland and all of these different locations. What do you make of that side from the Russian side of this now?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that the Ukrainian defense minister last month just straight out said that Ukraine is a de facto member of NATO. That the Ukrainian army is a proxy NATO force, and that Ukraine is willing to sacrifice its blood, but it must receive the equipment from NATO in order to carry out these tasks. So by his own definition, which then was, you could say, well, that's just an irresponsible, over-enthusiastic Ukrainian official. Then you back it up with the meeting of the Ramstein contact group on January 20th, where all of the defense ministers of NATO and other nations who aren't NATO, like Sweden and Finland and such, got together and, without exception, articulated a similar, theory of their involvement. That this is about a NATO war with Russia. The German foreign minister just said it straight up to her European colleagues. Germany is at war with Russia. Let's be clear. Russia has every legal right to attack any place in Europe that is involved in the transfer of these weapons to Ukraine. By agreeing to transfer these weapons to Ukraine, every nation that has said, yes, this is what we're going to do, has become an active participant in the conflict. And under the laws of war, Russia can take them out. Now, here's the good news. Russia is simply putting a marker down and saying, you've just increased our target depth. We can do this. But Russia has been managing escalation from the very beginning. The last thing Russia wants is to turn this into a not just a de facto, but a de jure of conflict between NATO and Russia, because now it's nuclear war and it's over. So I don't see, at least in this iteration, Russia reaching out and touching Polish logistics centers, German railheads, Spanish tunnels. I don't see that happening because Russia doesn't need to do that. Russia's winning this war, hands down. And Russia's going to win this war, hands down. But Russia is letting NATO know that if by some strange set of occurrences, all this equipment showed up in Ukraine, and Ukrainians were able to assemble a mailed fist that threatened Crimea or anything else, that it's game, set, over. I mean, Russia will open up and unleash everything they have on NATO because NATO is an active participant in this conflict. And again, if you take a look at Russian nuclear doctrine, one of the conditions for the use of nuclear weapons is if NATO or a NATO-like entity assembles sufficient conventional military power that threatens the existential survival of Russia. So what NATO is seeking to do, they're not going to accomplish it, but what they're seeking to do is give Ukraine the ability to act as a NATO proxy to threaten the existential survival of Russia, which means Russia, if this actually occurred, would use nuclear weapons.
So there's something that looks like it's out of the feline canine road
This isn't going to be a
beast.
tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine.
I
They're
could try
going to
to
hit
point it out, but
NATO. They're going to hit
okay,
London.
it
They're
just
going
went
to hit
human
Berlin.
at me. So
They're going to hit Paris. They're going to hit Brussels. They're going to hit Madrid. They're going to hit Lisbon. Hey, Portugal, good job. You just made yourself a nuclear target. This is the reality. Now, again, the good news is Russia's winning this war, and they're going to win this war. Russia's ready for this. They're prepared for this. But politically, this is an escalation. And imagine, put yourself in Russia's shoes. What NATO is saying is they want to kill Russians. They want to kill Russians. This isn't some mathematical game with tanks and steel and all this kind of stuff. It's not a computer game. This is reality. Now, I've said that what all they're doing is actually enabling Russia to slaughter more Ukrainians. That's the truth. But let's say that, because the blade of war cuts both ways. That's just the harsh reality of it. That the same blade you'd use to kill somebody is cutting you. And let's say Russia gets away with a 10-to-1 casualty ratio. That's a fantastic ratio, almost impossible to achieve, but they're doing that now. But let's say the new tanks come in and Russia sustains this, and they kill 40,000 Ukrainian troops, which is what's going to happen. Russia's going to lose 4,000 dead. That's 4,000 mothers, 4,000 wives, 4,000 daughters, 4,000 sisters, 4,000 grandmothers, and uncles and brothers and sons that are going to lose loved ones. This is unforgivable. Literally unforgivable. And remember, this isn't a war that was provoked. It's not an unprovoked act of aggression by Russia. This is something that has been planned by NATO since 2008 when they invited Ukraine to join. Something that has been perpetrated by NATO since 2014 when Angela Merkel and Hollande, the French president, conspired with Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, to use the Minsk Accords as a shield to buy time to build up this NATO proxy army for the purpose of killing Russians. This has been going on since the spring of 2022. We now have the Ukrainian head of intelligence saying the peace agreement that Russia was sitting down in Istanbul to sign with Ukraine that Boris Johnson killed, it was a sham too. It was never going to happen. It was designed to buy time. Do what? To kill Russians. To kill Russians. That's all this is about. And Lloyd Austin has admitted that when he came out in May of last year and he spoke in Warsaw and he said, we need to bring pain to Russia. Well, pain is a cute little word. It means death. It means dead Russians. It means suffering. And, for NATO, the United States, Germany, Portugal, and all others to act on this desire can only generate hate on the part of the Russians. And Europe better pray that the Russians turn out to be a forgiving nation, because what Europe is doing right now is unforgivable.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector, whose words have been incredibly poignant over the past couple of weeks. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you for your analysis and insight. And hopefully cooler heads will prevail in Europe. Otherwise, they're going to get us all killed at the end of the day. Scott, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As Neil in our chat just says, absolute scumbags. Yeah, they are. Absolute. And they're controlling the battlefield right now. They control the future. Lockheed Martin just yesterday saying it's ready with their F-16s, and now Ukraine is saying we want F-16s. Who's going to man that? Think you just hop into an F-16? These guys who have never flown an aircraft? I mean, these people are delusional.
They can just watch Top Gun a couple times and they're good to go. Right?
They're good to go.
It's all right there.
Play Afterburner on Sega Genesis, and you're good to go.
Or watch that presentation that, I can't remember if it was MSNBC, where they did the war games, watch that.
Yeah, you'll be good to go. Yeah, it was Meet the Press. Yeah, it was Meet the Press.
Meet the Press.
Play a
China.
Microsoft Flight Simulator. Yeah, you'll be good to go. I mean, how does this end at this point? Does this end with? I'll just ask all of you. Do you think that NATO and NATO countries, after all of these sanctions, all of the weapons, all of the money, all of the corruption that they've poured into Ukraine, they're just going to stop? Say, okay, we're done. Okay, Donbass is now under full Russian control. We're just going to stop. We're going to stop lobbing missiles. We're going to stop with the F-16s. We're going to stop with the tanks. We're done. We're just going to go home now. I mean, you have the protests all over Paris, all over Germany. There's a big anti-war rally in the United States. So maybe the people will move the world to get them out of there. But I don't know how this ends. I mean, it either ends with NATO saying we're done, we're going home, we're picking up our ball and going home, or it ends with Russia cleaning the floor with NATO. What's the middle ground here?
Yeah, I don't see the U.S. getting out of it as long as we can continually make the money back that we're giving to Ukraine by selling them our weapons.
Oh, it's been great.
As long as that's going on.
It's been great for the United States. It's been great for the not the United States people. It's been great for the military-industrial complex. It's been great for natural gas providers, right? So now we're able to sell natural gas to Germany after we blow up their pipeline at 4 times the cost of what they were paying for it before the pipeline was blown up. This is brilliant.
Well, and the fact that there's zero accountability, there's nothing telling us where or who this money is going to. I guarantee there's some personal pocket padding going on as well. It's not just military-industrial complex. Like, these people that are pushing it, they're paid advertisers. So why are you pushing it so hard? Because you're getting something out of it.
Well, and a source told me something very fascinating today about an individual in Ukraine. I won't name names because this was an off-the-record conversation, but very interesting because the person who happens to be in the United States but is also travels to Ukraine on a regular basis gets to live lavishly, basically. And is just getting $1 million checks deposited in their account. Where does that money come from? Oh, just use your imagination where that money comes from. And the palatial palace that you get to live in Ukraine that has a pool with your nice cars. Where's that money coming from? Yeah, you know where it's coming from. Unbelievable. So, what's next? Someone says, Welsh22, thank you for your super chat. Welsh32 and on YouTube says, what's next? NATO sending Ukraine Apache helicopters? Who knows? Well, we're just cleaning out whatever we have at this point. But Lockheed Martin's like, hey, we're ready. You want F-16s, Zelensky? We got them. I don't care if they blow up the moment we send them, as long as you're paying for them. The moment they arrive, they will be destroyed. Just like any of these tanks that arrive in Ukraine will be destroyed. They're going to be rubble. They're going to be molten lava in a few minutes after they arrive there. Why are we wasting our time, money, and more importantly, human lives with all of this? Truly disgusting. Truly disgusting. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going...
Yeah, I don't know about that Rumble thing either. It's just going to be another... Just like YouTube, Google, any Google shit. Let's see.
Let's talk about the United Nations. So the United Nations planning to criminalize spreading misinformation that causes social disorder and hatred. So this is the report that comes to us from Natalie Winters over at the War Room. She's doing some great work. Here's the headline: United Nations plan to criminalize spreading misinformation that causes social disorder and hatred. And so she writes, the United Nations has launched a new initiative to counter the use of information and communications technologies for criminal purposes, which appears to apply to individuals who share misinformation. So private companies, including social media platforms like Facebook's parent company Meta, are also involved in this venture. Draft versions of this new convention reveal the United Nations may criminalize posts that promote, quote, hatred. What does that mean, by the way? Including ideological and political hatred, in addition to another vague term that's in this document, extremism. What does it mean to be extreme? Like speaking out against, forced vaccine mandates?
Is like wearing spandex and bike helmets on a normal bike ride? I mean,
is that extreme? Those, what is extremism?
Well, it's all subjective. They're all subjective words.
And that's
what's extreme to you is not extreme to me.
And of course, then they get away with this because if they have this draft resolution, it can ruin someone's life. Forget whether or not this ends up like going to a Supreme Court in anybody. It doesn't matter because once they've labeled you this way, you lose your livelihood. Like we've seen in the United States, without having any criminal record or criminal charges brought against somebody, their lives have been ruined because, they've been called extremist, they've been called, politically extreme, so they've had their PayPal account shut down, Venmo account shut down, they've been debanked. For what? For their political views? That's exactly what's happening, right? I mean, we spoke to Brandon Straka, who was at January 6th. He was there to give a speech. He never went anywhere inside the Capitol. He was outside filming what was going on and had his life turned upside down. He was labeled extreme, right? He was labeled
with a cell phone.
With a cell phone, just filming. He was there to give a speech that day. And then what? He ends up not being able to have like PayPal, Venmo, all of these banking, all of these companies shut him down. So you don't even have to have criminal charges brought against you. It doesn't matter. If they label you this way, then this is what happens. So another piece of this, in addition to the vague term extremism, you have the Chinese Communist Party also submitted proposals to criminalize sharing information that results in social disorder. So that's also part of this UN draft. So China's like, hey, can we add in a little extra phrases over here? The effort began back in 2019 when the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution calling for the formulation of a convention on countering the use of information and communications technologies for criminal purposes. Currently, an ad hoc committee is working on details of this, including member states, jurisdictions, focus areas for the convention, which will be formalized in September of 2024. So right now, these UN conventions sort of broadly address information and communications technologies. The new version, though, will be much more specific, and they will put it in the context of criminal purposes. That's the context. Criminal purposes. Quoting now. Criminal purposes. So what exactly constitute criminal purposes, Natalie Winters writes? It's totally vague. Totally vague. And from the available information about the convention, the term appears to include individuals who spread misinformation. Again, what is misinformation? What the government is actively spreading? Like, is there any criminal charges and for the criminal purposes of the United States government?
Why doesn't propaganda get the same misinformation, disinformation, and propaganda? Why isn't that in there?
I don't know, because Rand Paul said that, right? Rand Paul saying that to Secretary Mayorkas' face. He's like, what the biggest spreader of mis and disinformation in the world is? The United States government.
Mm-hmm.
So we are the ones that have to be looked out for? No. It's the United States government. We just did a whole report last week on Iran. The United States government actively creating fake accounts inside of the FBI and the intelligence community to create and foment war and regime change in Iran. Fake accounts. And they're worried about us? They're worried that we're gonna actually uncover them and spread the truth. So the most recent draft of the convention explains how the UN is working with countries to promote, facilitate, and strengthen international cooperation. So there's an example here we'll put up on the screen. At face value, the forms of speech the UN is trying to curtail may seem justified, but the broad scope of what constitutes subversive posts or the promotion of political or ideological hatred could easily be used to target content critical of the far-left globalist agenda of groups like the UN or the World Economic Forum. So, for example, on your screen, Article 29 of the draft document focuses on terrorism-related offenses, calling on countries to criminalize commissioning, inciting, or recruiting terrorism, which it defines as spreading of strife, sedition, hatred, or racism. So you could be accused of terrorism if you spread strife. Like if you speak out against the World Economic Forum for being a globalist cabal. Or
So basically,
shining a light on their agenda, right? I mean, would that be considered strife, Philip? Like if I, or sedition?
well, yeah, that's what I was getting at, because if my words cause strife, that means what they're saying is it's illegal for me to piss people off.
Right.
Like if I make somebody else angry, I don't have to be angry myself, but if my words make somebody else angry, I have just like created strife.
Right.
So it would be like, so my livelihood could very well depend on how somebody else interprets what I said.
Right.
Right, because you can't, these days, if you misgender somebody, that is an act of aggression. So that's even beyond what they're saying.
Right. Oh, it's hatred or hatred or racism. I'm sure they'll include. Right now they've got hatred, racism, sedition, and strife. I'm sure they will have in there additional for like I don't know, for gender as well. Like we got racism.
Well, that's why they keep. I always say this, like they keep these things purposely vague because then they'll sell it as no, we're only saying this. It's hate. It's whatever. But it is totally left to interpretation and can then further be expanded and use the same words. Because no, all of a sudden now this is hate, this is strife, where before it was just going to affect this. You know, it's not nefarious. It's going to only affect this small thing.
Yeah.
It's just hate. We don't want people getting upset, and then it expands. That's what always happens.
But back to the World Economic Forum piece of this, like right, so it's strife, I guess. If I call out this globalist cabal and tell you what they're going to do to our lives. But I'm pointing out these panels and exactly what their plans are. And, oh, by the way, what they've already done to us. That's creating strife. Or that's hatred. Or that's creating social disorder. That's another term. If there's anything that creates serious social disorder, you could be labeled a criminal. But see, the thing is...
I'm guessing... I'm guessing this does not apply, though, to politicians... or the insanely wealthy. They can do whatever they want. I'm sure that like a politician, what they would just consider that riling up your base, and that's not considered causing strife. That's just going for votes, I guess. I'm assuming.
I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're on the right or you're conservative, then they'll probably come after you. Like they'll label, they'll go after Donald Trump for that. But if it's on the left, then that's free speech, and
right.
You're fine. If Black Lives Matter goes and destroys a building, and people online tell them where to meet to be a part of it, that's democracy.
That's grassroots organizing.
Right. So, a couple of things, I'll wrap it up with this, because some of the participants in this, the participants include Amazon Web Services. So just think, David, you can speak more to this than I can, but Amazon Web Services runs almost the entire internet, right? So if Amazon is involved in this policy, they can tell you, they can pull everything down. They run everything.
That's like, so a couple examples. Like what if you're on Netflix or whatever, all of a sudden there's a network outage, and then Walmart doesn't work, and Amazon, certain things don't work, and like the whole internet, people are like, oh my gosh, I can't stream my services. That's because almost everything is hosted on Amazon. And we saw with Parler what Amazon is able to do if they don't agree with what's on your app or what's on your website or whatever. They can just shut you down. They completely killed Parler in like a 48-hour period.
Yeah, because the entire server infrastructure is run on Amazon Web Services. Heck, The reason that Amazon is so successful is because that initial contract that they created with the CIA, and the CIA paid them. So they're very, very cozy with the CIA.
Our show actually is running on Amazon servers, just FYI. So, yeah.
Yeah, the sad part is, it's like, I mean, yeah, and what do you do? I mean, how do you get around that,
choice.
right? I mean, I don't know.
You can't, because there's nobody else that provides it for the price. You know, if you look at other server infrastructures, you can move away from it, but the price just, like, triples. And so that's how they get you, because like they did with books. When Amazon first opened, they're like, let's sell everything at a loss or write for cost, and we'll get rid of our competition, and then we'll expand the prices. So it's like you're kind of in a catch-22, because when you're just getting started, you can't afford to go out and spend, you know, all these thousands of dollars to host things. You have to start small, and Amazon makes that possible, but then it gives them total control.
Yeah, and unfortunately, and then they want to shut down independent creators and content, and that's how they control things. Well, so, you know, here you've got the participants: Amazon Web Services, the Chamber of Commerce of the United States of America is a participant. Facebook's parent company Meta and Microsoft are participating in this. Interpol has participated in the discussion about the convention and the prominent threats they say that they must face, including misinformation. And we learned about this. We have Gutierrez, of course, the head of the United Nations. They're speaking at the World Economic Forum, basically telling us exactly what's going to happen with speech and misinformation. Watch.
Yes, but there is a responsibility of the platforms. I mean, one can argue if we have something, as you mentioned, in the media, and if someone is attacked in a way that is wrong, there is a possibility to go to the court. In social media, there is no responsibility. And I can understand the argument of social media platforms saying, well, this is put by people, so it's not our responsibility. But the truth is that the algorithms are made in such a way that they amplify, in a preferential way, a certain number of things. And when the algorithm amplifies, then there is, in my opinion, a responsibility, and there should be accountability